In this week's episode of Learning How to Light, we're sticking with flash and talking about how you trigger it. Now, triggering is vital because, of course, the short pulse a flash emits has to be synchronized to your camera's shutter. In this episode, all I'm going to talk you through is the absolute basics. So you can obviously trigger the flash by having it on camera, you can have it on a cable of some sort, or you can use a simple optical trigger. We're going to go into more depth next week about things like advanced optical triggering systems and radio triggers. Triggering. So how do you set off your flash so that that very brief pulse of light coincides with the shutter on the camera being open? Predictably, you've got quite a range of options, ranging from cheap and simple to expensive and complicated. Now, I've been trailing this little section for quite a while, haven't I? I keep threatening to talk about triggering. Probably got you quite wound up and quite scared by now. Don't be afraid. Essentially, all we're doing is finding methods whereby that flash synchronizes up with that brief period of shutter is open. Okay? Don't be too concerned. We're going to go through each one in turn in hopefully enough depth to give you the idea, but not too much to confuse you. Now, the simplest method by far of triggering your flash is, of course, to have it mounted onto the camera, or even built into the camera in some cases. This allows you maximum amount of communication between whatever flash you're using and the camera. So you'll have things like perhaps a ready light in the viewfinder because the flash will be able to tell the camera, I'm ready to fire. It may well also allow you to use various forms of automatic exposure mode with the flash because the ability to communicate back and forth might let you use something like TTL metering, for example, which I talked about earlier very briefly. Drawback, of course, is that you're very limited in terms of direction. Obviously, if you're taking a picture like this, well, the flash is just here. That's it. You can't move it around, you can't light your subject from a different angle. You're stuck with it being just on camera. And of course, even by this stage of the course, we understand that direction is really, really important. You know, where the light is falling in relation to your subject can make a huge difference to how your pictures will look. So being limited to it just being on camera is obviously a big no-no right from the outset. Doesn't mean you won't use it from time to time. I still occasionally use my flash on camera simply as a trigger to set off other flashes. And sometimes it's very useful just to have it on camera just to add a little pop of light just to help lift the shadows. But this is your very basic starting point. Okay, triggering extends out to having the lights all sorts of different places so you can do much more interesting things with your lighting. Quick little geeky note, because you're dying to find out these sort of things, I know. This is mounted on what's called a hot shoe. You find these in all sorts of places, obviously primarily on top of cameras, but also in other sorts of flash mounts, and even things like microphones in the video and film industry are sometimes mounted on them. This is what's called a hot shoe because it allows communication between whatever's on top and the camera, in this case a flash. It has electronic contacts and things in it that allow information to pass between them. You can also get something like this, which is the same shape and the same size and will hold a flash perfectly well, but there are no connections whatsoever. This is simply a metallic mount. This is called a cold shoe because, of course, no information passes between it. There's no way information could. Worth knowing about because, of course, you might accidentally plug something into one of these thinking there'll be connections or ways of triggering, and nothing will happen. Geeky points there, worthwhile knowing for a pub quiz. Now, the simplest and cheapest way to move your flash off camera and still trigger it is to use some sort of synchronization cable or sync cable. In this case, the simplest going is what's called a PC cable. If you want to be really geeky, that stands for, I believe, Pronto Comptor and relates to old-fashioned shutters. But don't worry about that. Cables like this could not be simpler. You take one end and plug it into the requisite hole on your camera, like that. You may find that your camera needs an adapter to go in here because not all cameras come with that socket anymore. Then you take the other end and you plug it into your flash unit, like that. And then consequently, the flash will be fired by the camera. There we go, shutter, flash, like that. Okay? It's a very, very simple connection. That means, of course, you can now position the light wherever you like, as long as the cable reaches. But therein, of course, lies one of the problems. You're now physically attached between the camera and the flash. Cables like this are pretty cheap, usually less than £20, and they're fairly robust. Although do be careful with this end. I've crushed many in my time, and if those contacts get squeezed together they become pretty useless. Also make sure you've got the right bits for each end. This happens to be your standard sort of 3.5mm mini headphone jack. You find some that take a larger headphone jack, some that take the other end of the PC cable. You can sometimes adapt these by adding a larger headphone jack onto it. I suggest, since they're so inexpensive, you carry various different versions, certainly if you've got more than one type of flash, because you never want to be short of one of these. I always carry lots of these in my kit bags because they are my last ditch technical resort. Okay, they should always work even when more high-end fancy stuff like radio triggers don't work. The catches with this lovely, simple, otherwise amazing piece of kit, which now allows you to take your flash off camera, is that of course you're attached. That means you can't move the flash any further than the cable will reach, and you may end up with lots and lots of cable trailing about the place, which can be inconvenient and possibly even dangerous. And also this is a very, very simple cable. All it will do is trigger the flash to fire, nothing more than that. As we'll see later on, you can get cables that will allow you to adjust power output over a distance, and even remote triggers that will do that. All this will do is tell the flash fire or don't fire, nothing more complex than that. You should find that something like this will come with whichever flash you buy. As I say, I keep lots of these in my various kit bags because they're an essential technical backup, okay? Not to be overlooked even when you move on to more advanced methods. Now, if you want to move your flash off camera and retain some degree of control, or use things like TTL or other exposure modes, you need some sort of dedicated cable like this. This works by plugging one end into the hot shoe of your camera, and the other end becomes basically a hot shoe into which you put your flash unit. And now, predictably enough, here we go, the camera will trigger the flash. Okay, simple as that. You must make sure you get a dedicated cable for your flash and your camera, because you're talking things like TTL languages, and there needs to be communication between the two. So you couldn't have, for example, a Nikon flash gun, Nikon camera, and a Canon cable. They wouldn't talk to each other. They might allow you to trigger the flash, but nothing more than that. The catch, of course, is that you're still attached. Okay, you're still cabled, so you've still got a range within which the flash can be positioned. Also, for what they are, they're very expensive. This is 50 or 60 pounds, and since I don't use things like TTL very much, there isn't much advantage to me over using a much more simplistic sync cable. However, as you can see, I do own one, and I keep it in my camera bag because it's yet another technical backup, and you can never have too many technical backups. Most larger flash units like these, and many flash guns, come with what's called an optical slave. Now this is a superbly useful piece of technology that allows you to use lots and lots of flashes and simply trigger them from one flash. Built into the unit will be a sensor of some type, which functions very simply in that it sees another flash and it triggers its own flash to fire. Nothing more than that. The speed of light means that this happens pretty much instantaneously, so everything syncs up. The big plus is that now you can start to position flashes wherever you like. You're not bound by the length of a cable anymore. If you've got a multi-flash setup, then you can simply fire one flash directly from the camera, whether you attach it to the camera or trigger it via a cable, and then all the rest will be in slave mode and will fire in sync. You don't need 8 cables if you've got 8 flashes. You just need one, and the other 7 flashes are all in slave mode. What's the catch? Well, predictably, there's a few. First off, it's just a simple optical trigger. Just like the simple sync cable, all it can do is tell the flash to fire or not fire. You can't adjust the power at a distance, or adjust any of the other functions, or use things like TTL metering. It's just fire, don't fire. Secondly, it's a very simple optical slave. That means it sees a flash and it fires. Okay? That also means it might see other flashes and fire, besides the flash you want it to be triggered by. That might mean other people working nearby, or it might mean you've got something perfectly set up and some amateur comes by and starts snapping away and they set your flashes off. It might even mean, as I've had happen several times, that passing emergency vehicles with their flashing lights will set off your flashes. So it's worth bearing in mind. It also, being optical, relies on line of sight. So you may find it's less effective if you hide your lights around behind things, or you perhaps need to place a light in another room, or a light at a particular distance, whereby the triggering flash often gets scattered over a long distance and therefore can't reach the light you've placed away over there somewhere. Overall though, an optical slave is an incredibly useful piece of kit to have. Pretty much every single flash I own, apart from my tiny cheapest little ones, have optical slaves built into them. They're vital. They allow me a great deal of versatility in how I choose to set up my lights, and they also allow me to mix and match. For example, I can have my flash gun mounted onto my camera like so, and have one of my ProPhoto heads set to a slave mode, and the flash from my Nikon flash gun will set off the flash from my ProPhoto. Very, very useful indeed. I can have, say, one flash gun as a trigger and 4 or 5 other heads of any different manufacturer, and they'll all go off at the same time. So an optical slave, despite being simple, is really, really useful.